Taking a look back at the Denver Broncos 2020 NFL draft class, the pressure is on for some players to make the roster after this season. We'll dive deep into that on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, every single day, all year long. Make sure you subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss out on a day's worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, and more as we take you through the upcoming 2023 NFL season. This is the place to be every single day. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover practices. I cover games for the team. Joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. And yesterday's episode of the show, if you're an everydayer, you know that we talked about the 2021 NFL draft class headlined by Patrick Surtain, Caden Stearns, Javonte Williams, Quinn Miners, Baron Brown, and other players there but really setting the foundation for this team going forward. So we're going to take a step back yet another year, looking at the 2020 NFL draft class for the Broncos. John Elway's final draft as general manager for the team when Vic Fangio was the head coach. And to be honest with you, Sayre, you look at this class, and I feel like the theme for the players on the roster is this is a year they have to go out and they have to prove it going forward in order to come back next season.
A lot of guys kind of maybe teetering on that proverbial roster bubble, right? They might be kind of on there, might be kind of safe, who knows? But really starting with Jerry Jeudy, like you mentioned, Cody, this is a big time prove it year. And of course, I think the Broncos have proven they are invested in Jerry Jeudy at this point. They picked up his 5th-year option, which, just to clarify, that wasn't something that Jerry Jeudy decided. I've seen a number of people say to me, Cody, and this is just, I think, a common misconception maybe, but they've said to me like, well, it looks like Jerry wants to be in Denver. He re-signed for 2024. No, this was actually the Broncos' decision. They have this option. Every rookie contract for first-round picks since the CBA was changed way back in 2011 has this built-in 5th-year option for teams. Remember way back when, Cody, they used to sign first-round picks, a lot of them to like 7-year deals, 8-year deals. It got crazy. So there's now a cap on all that. But the Broncos picked up Jerry's 5th-year option. He is on the club this year. He's under contract already for next year. Now the question is, can he establish himself as a legit wide receiver 1 in the NFL? The circumstances, I would argue, have not been favorable for him potentially doing that early on in his NFL career. And it's tough because you look at that rest of that 2020 draft class, especially at wide receiver, and you see CeeDee Lamb, you see Justin Jefferson, you see T. Higgins, all these guys getting ready now to break the bank at the position. These guys are all probably going to be $30 million a year types of players now. What does Jerry have to do in 2023 in order to get to that level? Because I still think he can do it.
Well, I think comparison is the thief of joy, right? It's easy to sit and say, the Broncos should have gotten Justin Jefferson with the 15th overall pick. Remember, initially, everyone thought that Jerry was going to be the first wide receiver taken off the board. And then they thought that, okay, hey, well, Denver, when they're picking at 15, well, they're going to get Henry Ruggs. I mean, thankfully, that never happened here for Denver. I think that situation was there, even though how talented of a player Ruggs was, unfortunately, who knows what would have happened, and that would have been maybe not a good look here for the Broncos. And for the fact that he was the selection, but hey, Justin Jefferson, talented, CeeDee Lamb, talented. And I think when you look at those situations, I mean, Sayre, you can make a legitimate case that Justin Jefferson in Minnesota had a better environment, better circumstances around him there. CeeDee Lamb had better circumstances, environment around him in Dallas than Jerry Jeudy simply had in Denver. Now, his rookie season, the one game, the Chargers game with all the drops, that really highlighted his rookie season in the eyes of so many people and so many fans initially. Like, oh my gosh, he had all this many drops in this game. I remember a lot of people soured on him from that moment, but it is so hard to deny the talent that he actually possesses. And you can see it, his route running ability, his ability to create separation. I truly believe he is one of very few players in the NFL that is truly unguardable one-on-one. You see guys like Devontae Adams. You see guys like Justin Jefferson. Heck, Amari Cooper is a great example to throw out there. And a lot of these guys coming from Alabama, to be honest with you, are great route runners. Jerry is in a tier of his own as well. So for me, I look at 2023. It seems like the environment around Jerry Jeudy right now, specifically on paper, right, and we have to see it play out, is probably the best it has been or that it will be in Denver in his time since, being drafted as a first-round overall pick. And with that, look, comes expectations. We understand that. I think his finish, with how bad the Broncos offense was last year, the fact that he was able to do what he was able to do, it was impressive in my opinion. You can see it. And Jerry Rossberg said, hey, you know what? We're going to run the football, and we're going to get Jerry Jeudy the football in space. We're going to move this guy around. Sean Payton is as good as they come when it comes to an offensive coach. And so for me, I see Jerry Jeudy being in the best situation of his career so far to start here this upcoming season with Denver. And I think that, I think this is a circumstance and a situation where he can go out there and he can actually prove that. And I think he may just do that this upcoming year.
I think he will too, Cody, and specifically for something you just mentioned, getting him out in space and really allowing him to do what I think is probably his most underrated skill, which is creating yards after the catch. And again, it's been just years of woes offensively for the Denver Broncos, years of players not being utilized properly or not consistently being utilized properly, I should say. And Jerry Jeudy, to me, every time he gets the ball, he becomes almost like, if you ever watch Allen Iverson play, it's kind of like that where he's trying to break somebody's ankles out there. He's trying to hit you with a little crossover move or like the hesitation one direction and quickly sprint the other way. He's very, very crafty with his quickness. Like Jerry may not time in the 4.3s or anything like that. He's not like a Tyreek Hill level speed. He's fast, but I think his really exceptional skill is being quicker than pretty much everybody else and being able to decisively get in one direction quicker than anybody else, specifically defenders that he's going up against. Yards after the catch, I think Sean Payton, we're going to see, Cody, as this season progresses, I think we're going to see that Sean Payton noted when he was watching last year's tough to watch film that Jerry Jeudy really excels at gaining yards after the catch. And I think we're going to see a lot more crossers. I think we're going to see a lot more opportunities for him to do exactly that, to create in space, because he is an offense creator. He's not just a good route runner who, we're talking about making all these weird shapes and getting to the sideline or getting to a point and just really breaking somebody's ankles, stopping and catching the ball, getting tackled right away. This is a guy that you want to keep in motion. You want to keep him running at full speed, because then when he gets in the open field, he becomes a bit of a whirling dervish out there. So that's what I'm most excited about for Jerry Jeudy, is to hopefully get a lot of opportunities in space to create and show what he can do after the catch.
And if he can do just that and the Broncos find ways to capitalize on it, which they failed to do so many times last year until the end of the season, but even in 2021 under Pat Shurmur, Jerry Jeudy was forgotten in the offense, which should be criminal, should be a sentence in terms of you can't coach in the NFL for 2 years because of what you did to Jerry Jeudy type stuff here for Pat Shurmur. But aside from that, Broncos country, there are a multitude of other players here from the 2020 class that are still on the roster, and there's some question marks behind that. We'll dive deeper into that, including two players here who have big prove-it years ahead of them. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, FanDuel Sportsbook. And obviously with baseball season in full swing, there's no better place to get in on all the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers, they get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. And if you want to get involved in NFL futures action specifically pertaining to the Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson currently has the 7th best odds right now in comeback player of the year voting in terms of the preseason futures. If you believe that he's going to bounce back in a big time way this upcoming season, you may want to capitalize on that at FanDuel Sportsbook. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of the National Football League.
The Denver Broncos had 4 picks on day 2 of the 2020 NFL draft, and as of right now, just 2 of them remain, Cody. KJ Hamler and Lloyd Cushenberry, and I would argue that at least for KJ Hamler, finds himself here on the roster bubble or the fringe going into training camp. So let's start with talking about the guys who are no longer in Denver, right? Obviously, Michael Ojemudia, he was let go last year. McTelvin Agim also made it to the practice squad somehow last year, and then ultimately they let him go as well. Those guys no longer there, both third-round picks, but KJ Hamler was the team's second-round pick in 2020. Back-to-back wide receivers to open the draft. I about flipped a cork when this happened. I was so excited about it. I was just thrilled. The Broncos desperate for offense for a long time, folks. Okay, we all know, we've all been in this grind. So getting players like Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, that was exciting at the time. KJ Hamler, though, has maybe been the most snake-bitten player on the entire roster, hasn't he? It's been brutal to watch from our seats, and just to know the talent that he has, the game-changing ability that he brings to the table. It's a huge offseason for KJ Hamler. Hopefully, he's healthy enough for training camp to participate fully in preseason. We'll see what happens there, but it's a big offseason for KJ Hamler, critical for his chances of being on the team any further.
Yeah, it is. And look, there's a point I want to talk about when I talk about KJ Hamler. Like for me, Sayre, it genuinely bothers me as a human being to see some of the discourse that I see, whether it be on comments, whether it be on Twitter, just about KJ Hamler. And look, nobody's as frustrated as KJ about the injuries that he had. Like, look, week 3, that injury he had against the Jets where ACL and a hip all at the same time happened. He lost around 40 pounds during the surgery process because he couldn't weight bear. He couldn't eat, the proper things at first. And it took him a while to get back. But the fact that he made it back to training camp, Sayre, I don't think people realize he made it back way ahead of schedule than he probably should have in this whole entire journey, in this whole entire circumstance. This is a dude who loves football. And I go back to the moment last year at training camp where KJ opened up about some of the mental health struggles, right? And then, it's great to see people show compassion. It's great to see people like, you know what, KJ, this is so important. Like your life as a human being is so important. But then the moment, he suffers a soft tissue injury or suffers a setback, you automatically see people, it's like a light switch, flip it right back to you. This guy's soft. This guy's fragile. It genuinely, Sayre, it bothers me to the core because so many people don't know KJ. And look, I had a chance to speak with him several times, get to know him a little bit last year. And this is a guy who was genuinely frustrated, wanted nothing more to be out there and couldn't do it. And I think there is frustration about that because, hey, like this is a production-based business. We understand that. But at the same time, I think we all, and I think media members especially, are guilty of this. We got to show more compassion towards players. And I understand, well, it's all about production. I get that. You can value production, but also take it a little easy in a sense on the conversations and the way that you talk about a player. Look, these guys, hey, you'd be surprised, Sayre, at how many players see tweets, see articles that get posted, see how fans are talking about them in the comments. And I think we're all human beings. At the end of the day, we see stuff like that about us. Yeah, we take it personal. It's hard because nobody knows the work behind the scenes. And I can tell you, KJ's been putting in a lot of work. And the fact that, Tim Patrick has welcomed him in and said, hey, I brought KJ into my home because Tim really cares about KJ Hamler. Russell Wilson really, really cares about KJ Hamler. So while I think we can all express our frustration about injuries, folks, just at the end of the day, remember this is a guy who's trying his damnedest to be out there. And I think it's so important to put that into perspective. And look, there's probably going to be people that disagree with what I said here. And they're like, well, it's the NFL. The NFL doesn't care about feelings. Well, maybe you can operate that way. I'm simply not going to do that. I hope KJ comes out and absolutely balls out. But look, when healthy, Sayre, look at what KJ brings to the table. He is a guy who's got probably some of the best speed on the team there. And that's a good thing to have. And obviously with the addition of Marvin Mims, it puts things into question. I don't think it was necessarily a move that was made to replace KJ Hamler, but I think it's a great insurance policy and it gives you something going forward as well, because as you know it, you need speed in the NFL on the offensive side of the ball in order to have a true advantage in today's game. KJ provides that. And if he can stay healthy, I guarantee you, Sayre, we are going to see that. We saw it last year in spurts where he got downfield for big-time games. He helped the Broncos win that game against the Jacksonville Jaguars with the 45-yard catch down the right sideline. So that's my little tangent I have on KJ, but then really kind of sets us up to another player here as well who's really approaching a crucial season, and that is Lloyd Cushenberry. Obviously, right now projected to be the starting center, and to be honest with you, I don't see anybody overtaking him for that job right now, Sayre, but this is a year specifically where Lloyd Cushenberry has to come in. He has to produce because there have been a lot of questions about whether or not he can be the guy at the center position long term.
There have, and really, as the Broncos have been rebuilding, reloading their offensive line here in 2023, the center position was largely left alone until the 7th round of the draft. And like you said, you bring in Kyle Fuller. So it's a lot of times, if you're looking to rebuild an entire area of a team, it's going to be a multi-year project. You're not always going to get that done in one offseason, although fans would like to. I'm still very, very curious as to why the Broncos did not participate in the veteran center market in free agency this offseason. Very, very team-friendly market. I was just looking yesterday too, Cody. Connor McGovern, our old friend, the Broncos draft pick out of Missouri once upon a time, he re-signed with the New York Jets despite the team having taken Joe Tippmann in the NFL draft. So it's just that goes to show you how team friendly this center market has been. It's been, I mean, these guys are, it's like will work for whatever, So the fact that the Broncos passed on that market entirely is very, very curious to me. Very interesting, almost confusing to a point to say, why not dip into this market on a 1 or 2 year deal? I think a lot of it has to do with maybe they believe more in Lloyd Cushenberry than meets the eye, right? We know there's connections between Sean Payton and the LSU program. I believe Ed Orgeron was actually a disciple of Sean Payton at one point, Cody. So not to say that he's, we've talked about this with Vic Fangio, not to say he's constantly reaching out to these old resources and saying, hey, what do you think of this guy? But the fact that Lloyd Cushenberry was a big-time starter for that LSU program, that legendary team back in 2019, I think there's something to that Sean Payton sees in these guys, and they are willing to go out on a limb for some of these young players to really try to extract the best out of them. Remember, the Saints were in the market for a center in that draft. They drafted, I believe that was the Cesar Ruiz draft for them, and they drafted him. They took him in the 2nd round. They could have taken Lloyd Cushenberry. They did not do that. So that's a question that I think maybe if it comes up at training camp, hey, you evaluated centers back in that 2020 draft. What did you see in Lloyd Cushenberry? I'd be very interested to know what Sean Payton says about that, because clearly this staff is higher on him than the majority, if not all, of Broncos country.
Go Tigers. It's Coach O would say there in terms of that. But yeah, I mean, you make some great points there. I think for a guy like Lloyd Cushenberry, you see how smart he is, right? Remember last year during training camp, Nathaniel Hackett said that they were putting on these events inside the position room where it was more so not necessarily trivia, but it was cerebrally challenging, right? And I think that's a great way to put it. Cerebrally challenging, and Lloyd Cushenberry was consistently dominating in those competition-based things there. The mental makeup is there for Cush. And I think the biggest thing that we're looking forward to seeing from him this year, at least, is the physical transition. And I will tell you this, he looks bigger this offseason, which hopefully bodes well for him, because he's going to have to man and anchor that middle right there, because teams defensively have tried to attack the A gap consistently for the last 3 years for the Broncos. And that's where, for Cushenberry, one of the areas he struggled with was just maintaining strength and maintaining leverage against some bigger defensive linemen and blitzing linebackers. And there was a lot of miscommunication between the center and the guards next to him, or the guards and the tackles, which then impacted the center. I'm very curious to see what Zach Strief envisions for the position, and more so envisions for Cushenberry, because, hey, this is really it. This is it for Cushenberry to go out there and really prove it. And I will say one area where Cush has kind of impressed me, I think, throughout the tenure of his career, every offseason, they've brought in somebody. The Broncos have brought in somebody at the center position. There's kind of been a little bit of a competition, and he's always come out on top there. And even after his rookie year, he even said, I understand why they did that. I didn't play good enough. Like, Cush is very self-accountable. I want to see if this system here with Sean Payton and this offensive scheme, if it gives Lloyd Cushenberry the best chance to play the best football of his career, that we know that going back to that LSU team, does this align maybe with the structure, maybe with the scheme that they had? Now, granted, you had Jamar Chase, you had Justin Jefferson, you had Joe Burrow. I mean, that was a team full of dogs there that year at LSU, and not to mention their defense was pretty stout. Cushenberry can be an intricate piece of what they want to do, but it has to come out in terms of production this upcoming season. And I think that's something Broncos Country is also eager of watching along as well. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts down below as you're watching along on YouTube, or if you're listening wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to us talk about the 2020 NFL draft class. We're going to continue the conversation with a couple of the other players who are still on the roster from that draft class, including a tight end that we have high hopes for this upcoming season. You'll get that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Real quick, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, because as the offseason brews and continues, there are storylines from all 32 teams around the NFL, and the local experts on the biggest stories bring you up-to-date information as to what's going on around the National Football League ahead of training camp. Get it today, Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. Two final players from the 2020 NFL draft class remain on the roster from that draft class, specifically in John Elway's final year as general manager. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much taking time to be able to just interact with us as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, interact with other Broncos fans in the comments. If you have a question, throw it in there. We'll be sure to answer it, interact with you as well. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Sayre, let's talk about two final players here from that draft class that are remaining on the roster. First off, we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball here, and we're going to start with a guy who last year, quite frankly, we talked about so many times in season. Why isn't this guy getting enough playing time? Why isn't he on the field, considering injuries, considering some of the issues Denver had depth-wise at receiver due to injuries? And that was Okwuegbunam, obviously a tight end here, and just really looking at where he's been so far from last year. I think, are in agreement that he was really a year of his NFL career got wasted by Nathaniel Hackett and his coaching staff. Sean Payton, though, from what I've seen at OTAs, from what I've seen at mandatory minicamp, has seemingly noticed what Albertoku can do and has put him in positions to succeed and wants him to keep carrying that over. As he mentioned, confidence is born from demonstrated ability. Albert has the ability, and the more he makes plays during camp and during maybe the preseason, where I'm sure he's going to see a lot of time, I think it bodes well. But this is also another big year for Albertoku as he looks to make the active roster here, considering Denver's moves at the tight end position this offseason.
And I think it's fair to imply, based on Sean Payton's quote, that a bit of rebuilding of his confidence was necessary after last year. Like you mentioned, Cody, kind of a wasted year for him. And I think Jerry Rosburg spoke to that at the end of the year, talking about after that Chiefs game where he scored a touchdown after being benched most of the season. Jerry Rosburg came out after the game and was like, I see this big, athletic, fast guy running around at practice, and I'm just wondering to myself why he's not playing. Really threw Nathaniel Hackett and his staff under the bus with that statement, but rightfully so. I mean, there has to be some accountability for actions like that, and I'm glad that he publicly stated that's not something that should have stayed behind closed doors, because all of us fans and analysts, everybody covering the team, we were owed an explanation of why your offense sucks and Albert Okwuegbunam is not playing. He could maybe help a little bit. He's at least, done some things in the NFL. So I was glad to hear Sean Payton say some good things about him. I was glad to hear that he looked good at OTAs and the opportunities that he was given. And I think a little bit of rebuilding of that confidence was necessary after last year. Now, are we putting the cart before the horse here, the proverbial horse, to say, man, could he work his way to being a second contract player with the team? There's a lot going on there at that position. Like you mentioned, you bring in other guys like Chris Manhertz, you bring in obviously Adam Troutman in the trade during the NFL draft, a fellow class of 2020 tight end as well there. Another interesting question, why Sean Payton, why Adam Troutman versus Okwuegbunam in that draft, same draft class? So really what I'm looking for Alberto at training camp is that consistent demonstrated ability, building confidence every single day. And as he gets more confident, Cody, I've always believed this, that Alberto can be a big time difference maker in the NFL. And I hope we get to see that in 2023.
I did an exclusive one-on-one interview with Albert following mandatory minicamp, and that story is up on milehighsports.com if you want to go check that out after you're done listening or watching this episode of Locked On Broncos. And just for him, I told him, I was like, hey, it looks like you're having fun again. It looks like you got your confidence back. And he said, yeah, he does it because he wants to prove it to his teammates. He wants to prove it to his coaches that, hey, I want to be a reliable option for these guys, and I want to show them that, hey, I can still play. I can still contribute. And so I think he's got a really good mindset going into training camp. I'm excited to see things kind of play out here for him. And maybe we see some explosive plays downfield with he and Greg Dulcich, which, I think Broncos fans wouldn't be opposed to seeing that happen here if it means the offense gets going a little bit there. Another player we're going to talk about here, Justin Strnad. He's entering the final year of his contract here with the Broncos. In terms of his 2020 class, really a lot of them outside of Jerry Jeudy, this is a contract year for them. You can make the argument for Jerry, he does have the fifth year, but for him, it's like, hey, secure the extension and get paid maybe this upcoming season. For Justin Strnad, he's been a guy that I know when he was initially taken out of Wake Forest, the projection was, and he was on a hot trend during OTAs and during training camp before he suffered that wrist injury that he had to have surgically repaired. I remember Ed Donatel specifically. I asked him how he was doing. He said, man, he's been great. He's such a fun player to watch, and he was doing a lot. But I think missing a year in the NFL, I think that hurt, I think, Strnad a little bit. But, he was thrown into the fire when he was able to come back a little bit, an inside linebacker, and, he struggled. That's what you expect with a young guy. But I would say this, he has grown year over year since he's been on the team. And I thought last year during the preseason, I thought he actually played really well at the linebacker position. And I remember they brought in Joe Schobert as well. And that was a whole nother experiment that we're like, Joe Schobert used to be a Pro Bowl guy. Like, what the heck happened to him? Justin has continued to improve. And that's what you want. I think when you talk about roster and player development, you want your guys to improve year over year to the point now Strnad has emerged into one of their top special teams players, and it could maybe be a guy that does rotate in at the linebacker position because, as you know, it's one of the most physically demanding positions, alongside offensive line, defensive line, and running back. Linebackers, they have a lot of volume. They have a lot of contact associated to it, so there are going to be some injuries that do pop up, and we'll see if it impacts the Broncos in a negative way or keeps guys out, but that is a position that you just, at this point in time of the NFL, you expect, hey, there's going to be injuries. Now your depth needs to be good. I think Strnad can emerge into a really good depth player at linebacker. And at OTAs and mandatory minicamp, I thought he actually looked pretty damn good. Granted, no pads were on. You're going to have to see that evaluation carry over into training camp. But for the most part, hey, right now, considering what the moves that Denver has made, he is one of those guys that you need on your special teams because of the value he brings as a core four specialist.
And I think, Cody, as you're talking about Justin Strnad, I kind of just am picturing Vic Fangio, rolling his meatballs, licking his chops, thinking about like, hey, all these 2020 draft picks that the Broncos had that could get cut here or potentially be on the trade block or things like that. And thinking about, if Justin Strnad doesn't make their 53, I just picture him back there in Miami, just, scheming in his brand. You never know how many more reunions can we have this season. We talked about that before, but I just think you're exactly right. Consistent improvement from Strnad, especially becoming kind of uncuttable on special teams. And that's the Broncos have, as much as they've struggled on offense these last handful of years, how bad have they struggled on special teams? And you can't afford to be letting go of guys that can excel in that area for you. So hopefully we will see his value reflected in that way, but we'll kind of see what does the roster construction look like if you keep 5 linebackers, or does that push another linebacker off the roster? Going to be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out. But I'm excited about Strnad in year 4 because here we are. He had kind of a theme with a lot of these 2020 guys, right? Like at least 1 year completely wasted for all of them, with KJ Hamler, with Okwuegbunam, even you could argue 2021 for Jerry Jeudy. And then, of course, that rookie year for Strnad, where he was looking so good at camp. There was talk that he was going to be coming onto the field purposefully in the nickel role in his rookie season as a 5th-round pick. There was a lot of high praise being thrown around about him at his training camp before that. I believe it was that wrist hand injury, right? So that almost actually cost him, cost him his hand or something. You've spoken about that before, but some really crazy stuff that went on there. Hopefully year 4, he can take another step forward.
Now we'll see how things plan out. And for the Broncos, as you go into training camp, specifically at linebacker, you have a multitude of guys right there. So when you're a coach, you're trying to make these plans or maybe personnel evaluation, vision, as we've heard Sean Payton say, how does the linebacker position play out? I know you and I in previous episodes, we've talked about, hey, we're really concerned about the depth at linebacker. I think this might be the first time coming into a season where you and I have sat here and we've said, you know what? I actually feel pretty dang good. I feel okay about where the Broncos linebacker depth is in general. So storyline to watch, Broncos Country. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree? How comfortable do you feel with the Broncos linebacker depth right now as we recap the 2020 NFL draft class? Share your thoughts down below on YouTube if you're watching there, or if you're listening wherever you get your podcast. You can always tweet us on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us part of your day every single day. If you're an everyday listener of the show, here's what you can expect on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos. The team has officially announced their training camp schedule, and fans have the chance to attend 12 open practices. We'll talk about the details that you need to know as a fan regarding training camp practices. And on top of that, 3 things that we would love to see happen at training camp. You'll get that and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.